November 7th, 1943. Midnight hung heavy over Bougainville Island. Out in the black water of Empress Augusta Bay, two Japanese destroyers crept along at full speed, their decks packed with nearly 500 soldiers from the 53rd Infantry Regiment. Engines throttled low, running lights off. The crews whispered orders as they closed on the coastline. The plan was simple and flawless on paper. Slip through the surf, land behind the American perimeter, and crush the U.S. Marines in a classic pincer strike before dawn. Every chart, every doctrine, every ounce of Japanese confidence said the same thing. Surprise, darkness, and steel would decide the night. In the jungle 3 miles inland, Major James Wilson of the 3rd Marine Division was hunched over his field map when the radio began to hiss. The operator's voice was tight, urgent, enemy barges sighted, multiple craft making landfall behind the line. Wilson's coffee went cold as he reached for his pencil. Red markers showed his front line. Blue pins showed expected Japanese approaches. Now, a fresh mark appeared behind his own perimeter. If the report was true, 500 enemy soldiers had just landed where no one thought they could. A lesser commander might have panicked. Wilson didn't. He'd spent months drilling his men for exactly this. The Japanese didn't know it yet, but they'd just stepped into a trap of their own making. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph McCaffrey stormed into the tent. Mud streaked across his uniform. 12 barges confirmed, maybe 15. They're unloading fast. Wilson nodded once. Good, he said. Let them. Outside, field phones buzzed to life as artillery coordinates were transmitted. The 12th Marines' 75mm pack howitzers were already trained on preset target zones, zones chosen months ago for this exact contingency. On the beach, Captain Izumu Akamatsu led the first wave ashore, the dark surf curling around their boots. They moved quickly, spreading into the jungle, confident that surprise was theirs. None of them saw the faint glow of trip flares hidden among the palms, or the tiny red lights flickering in marine observation posts further inland. When the first Japanese platoon reached the tree line, the jungle erupted. Howitzer shells screamed in, detonating across the sand with bone-shaking force. The 90mm coast defense guns joined in, their heavy rounds turning landing craft into molten wreckage. Fire ripped through the night, punctuated by the sound of human screams and the metallic shriek of twisted barges. Those who tried to run inland stumbled straight into pre-sighted artillery zones, where shells rained down with mathematical precision. The Japanese had planned to encircle the Americans. Instead, they were being erased before they even organized. Sergeant Herbert Thomas, commanding a machine gun squad near the inner perimeter, watched through field glasses as orange flashes lit the beach. "They're coming," he muttered. Moments later, he could hear them. Boots slapping mud, branches breaking, men shouting orders in Japanese. Thomas waited, finger on the trigger of his M19 .30 caliber machine gun. He'd been ordered not to waste ammunition. The Marines had created interlocking fields of fire covering every approach. When the first enemy silhouettes filled his sights, he let them come closer. 20 yards, 15, 10. Then he opened up. The muzzle flashes lit the jungle like lightning. Japanese soldiers crumpled mid-stride, their bodies tumbling into the undergrowth. Across the sector, Marines followed suit. Trip flares burst white against the canopy, revealing entire columns of attackers. Every burst of light was followed by disciplined fire, not chaos. Machine guns hammering in measured bursts. Riflemen picking targets, mortars walking explosions up the trails. The Japanese had expected confusion. Instead, they faced a machine of perfect coordination. Major Wilson's command post crackled with reports. Grid 174, enemy movement. Grid 181, request fire mission. Approved. 3-gun battery. Concentration Baker. Each call was answered within minutes. Shells landed exactly where scouts reported movement. The Marines' network of radios, spotters, and artillerymen turned the night into a calculated massacre. Captain Akamatsu, still believing he could salvage the operation, gathered 40 survivors and prepared a charge. Their mission had been clear: break the American line, sow panic, open a corridor for reinforcements. But the terrain ahead, low ridges laced with vines and coral outcroppings, had been mapped by the Marines weeks earlier. Every choke point was zeroed for artillery. Every defile was covered by overlapping guns. Akamatsu shouted, drew his sword, and led the attack. It lasted less than a minute. Carter's machine gun, supported by 2 others on adjacent ridges, cut the formation down. Those who hit the ground for cover found themselves in a shallow depression that had been pre-registered as Target Point 7. Mortar rounds arrived seconds later. The depression ceased to exist. By 0200, the so-called flanking force was in pieces. The few Japanese radios that had survived the bombardment were jammed by American interference. Officers tried using runners, but Marine snipers picked them off in seconds. The Japanese units were blind, deaf, and dying. Inside the perimeter, Major Wilson stayed composed, listening as his observers described the chaos. He understood exactly what was happening. The Japanese had stumbled into a textbook example of modern defensive warfare. Their old infiltration tactics, creep close, strike suddenly, rely on surprise, were obsolete. American fire control and communications had turned darkness itself into a weapon. At 0300, the 12th Marines shifted fire to secondary targets. 75mm shells screamed through the treetops, tearing apart groups of survivors trying to regroup. The heavier 90mm guns on the beachhead hammered the shoreline to prevent any retreat. The jungle was alive with concussion blasts, muzzle flashes, and the deep, mechanical rhythm of automatic fire. Sergeant Thomas, bleeding from shrapnel in his arm, refused evacuation. He directed his men with calm authority, maneuvering them in short rushes to close off escape routes. When a Japanese machine gun opened up from a concealed position, Thomas crawled forward under fire and tossed a grenade through the slit, ending it. His squad counterattacked in the pre-dawn haze, reclaiming ground foot by foot until all organized resistance broke. For that night's actions, he would later receive the Medal of Honor. By 0400, the Japanese were finished. The survivors, maybe 100 scattered men, were trapped between the burning beach and the unbroken marine perimeter. American artillery methodically shelled every likely avenue of withdrawal. The few who tried to swim for their destroyers were gunned down by coastal defense crews who could track their splashes through the phosphorescent surf. As the sky began to lighten, the scale of the disaster came into focus. Where 500 men had landed hours earlier, the sand was now carpeted with bodies. The jungle behind the beach was shredded into a wasteland of splintered trees and smoking craters. American casualties, 17 dead, 32 wounded. Japanese, nearly 400 killed. The rest vanished into the jungle, hunted, bleeding, broken. Wilson walked the battlefield. As the first rays of sun pierced the canopy. He'd seen death before, but not like this. Japanese weapons lay twisted beside their owners. A sword still clutched in a dead officer's hand. Akamatsu, they confirmed later, lay inches from an empty Nambu pistol. The air was thick with the smell of cordite, blood, and salt. Throughout the morning, Marines combed through the wreckage. They found maps, code books, and detailed plans showing exactly what the Japanese had expected to happen. Their confidence had been absolute. The documents outlined a one-week operation, establish a blocking force behind the beachhead, cut off Marine supplies, and annihilate the Americans in a pincer movement. Instead, their landing force had ceased to exist in 12 hours. By noon, engineers were bulldozing shallow graves. The tide washed up fragments of burned barges, twisted into grotesque sculptures by the night's fire. Intelligence officers photographed everything. What they saw confirmed what the Corps already knew. The enemy's tactical doctrine had frozen in time. The Japanese still believed they were fighting the Marines of 1942, rigid, slow, and reactive. But the Marines of 1943 had evolved into something else entirely, a synchronized organism of rifles, mortars, radios, and steel. Over the next 2 days, cleanup operations continued. M1917 light tanks moved through the jungle, crushing coral caves where holdouts hid. Engineers placed shaped charges at cave mouths, sealing them shut. Aircraft from the 7th Fighter Squadron swooped in to blast remaining pockets with rockets and bombs marked by colored smoke from forward observers. Every phase was systematic. Every movement was coordinated. There was no mercy left to give. For the Japanese 17th Army, the defeat was more than tactical. It was psychological. Reports of the annihilation reached headquarters within a week. Officers refused to believe it at first. An entire landing force destroyed by defenders outnumbered nearly 2-1? Impossible. But photographs didn't lie. The loss of almost 400 seasoned soldiers for 17 Marines shook confidence across the front. For the Americans, Bougainville became a textbook example of how modern combined arms warfare had eclipsed old-world tactics. Firepower, coordination, and communication had beaten courage and surprise. Sergeant Thomas's actions were studied in training manuals. Private Carter's machine gun emplacement was photographed and diagrammed as the perfect model for interlocking fields of fire. Future battles, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, would apply lessons first proven here in the humid darkness of Bougainville. When Major Wilson filed his final report, he ended with one sentence that summed up the entire Pacific transformation. They thought they had trapped us. They never realized we'd already planned their funeral. That night on Bougainville, Japan learned that courage without adaptation was suicide. The Americans didn't just repel the attack, they rewrote the rules of war.